Welcome to the SkillTorch Disrupt podcast, where we dive into the world of innovation and technology. My name is Malika, and I'm the founder of SkillTorch, which is a recruitment company specializing in the digital and tech industries across the globe. Today, I have with me Charles Yhap, who is the CEO at Clean Robotics, and he's joining us today to really talk to us a bit more about the industry as a whole around trash robotics, what it means, what it's about, the constraints around that. Charles, I'll just pass it over to you and you can just dive straight in and tell us more about yourself and what we're going to uncover today.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Malika. It's great to be here. So my name is
Likewise.
Charles Yhap. I'm CEO and co-founder of Clean Robotics. We make a product called TrashBot. It's a system that uses AI, robotics, and computer vision to detect waste as you throw it away, and it sorts it 300% more accurately than the public. We're targeting high traffic public places like airports, convention centers, arenas, universities, malls, um, you know, uh, places where the size of the problem kind of justifies a solution like ours.
Nice. And then tell us a bit more about your background and, what you did before Clean Robotics and what made you kind of uh, start this company.
Sure. So I'm a serial social entrepreneur. So I get involved in organizations that have double and triple bottom line. So I'm looking for profit motive, social bottom line, environmental bottom line. Obviously, what we're doing with Clean Robotics kind of hits all three. In the past, I started an organization that confronted human trafficking and slavery. I've also done environmental advocacy in Latin America and labor rights advocacy in the United States. There's
Nice.
several others depending on when I start counting. I usually just kind of stop at three.
Fair enough. I mean, there's a, wide range of industries and also like very impactful ones that
Mm,
are kind of very community led.
yeah, yeah. It's kind of what gets me up in the morning.
Ah, good. Yeah, so I mean, I think the question for you I have, I mean, what is TrashBots? You mentioned that, and I know that's something is part of what Clean Robotics offers. What does this mean?
Yeah, so the idea for TrashBot, it's basically a really, really, really smart trash can, and the idea for it was born out of frustration. So
Hmm.
if you've ever been to a place like a Whole Foods or something, I'm not picking on Whole Foods, it's just something people can relate to. Let's
Yeah.
say you eat something at the hot bar, and on your way out, you have to dispose of your items, and you'll be confronted with a waste receptacle array where you really have to concentrate and think about where you're putting your things. And to this day, I'll still have the experience that I'm not sure I'm putting things in the right place. And so we got to thinking that we can probably build something that does it better than people and makes it much more easy and a better experience. And at that time, we saw that robotic components were becoming cheaper and more accessible. Sensors were becoming commoditized, and we saw a trend line that artificial intelligence algorithms would also be commoditized. Um, and so, we started making the robot. And what kind of sealed the deal for us was when we realized how expensive traditional waste receptacles are. So, just by way of example, the Denver International Airport has a set of three bins. These are just, stainless steel tubes, and they cost $3,000 a pop. They have 250 of those across the airport, so that's, $750,000 just in shiny metal tubes, which people don't use correctly.
Hmm.
Right. And so kind of those prices, we thought we could build a robot for, a similar cost and add, way more value in terms of data, accurate sorting, fine mitigation, carbon abatements, and so on. And so, the rest is history.
So how does this work then? So, because I'm trying to actually visualize this right now. So,
Hmm.
you've got the trash cans. Because I've never seen this. I've never seen a robot or an AI that is
Mm,
related to waste. And I actually think the concept is a brilliant idea. I think if it is going to
hmm.
save money in the long run,
Hmm.
fantastic.
Hmm.
How can I visualize this then? Is this literally like a robot that's going to pick up and like put things in the right place?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, um, the way that our system works is you just approach it like a normal waste receptacle. You there's a kind of an opening at the top. You deposit your item of waste into what we call a sensing chamber. At that point, the chamber will take a picture, take some sensor values, run that across a database of tens of thousands of images and similar items of waste that we've seen.
Hmm.
Make a classification. The chamber will move over to the correct bin and just drop it in. And I think it's worth mentioning that the waste industry globally is enormous, and we're not the only ones that kind of see an opportunity for the application of AI, computer vision, or big data. There's a number of other companies around the world that are making comparable inroads using similar technologies. And the way that we look at it is that at any point that waste changes containers or changes hands, there's an opportunity for value creation, an
Hmm.
opportunity to capture data that is relevant for different stakeholders, whether that be kind of a private company, perhaps it'll be a public or governmental authority. Or it could even be valuable to waste generators and brands that are looking to track where their products end up from a extended producer responsibility perspective.
Okay, cool. You mentioned data, collecting data with regards to gathering this information to identify like which trash can they should put it on. So,
Mhm.
what sort of data-driven insights have you sort of gained from the use of TrashBot in sort of waste management as a whole?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the problem that we're solving is the one of human confusion. Recycling rules are really complicated. They vary from place to place, and people have a lot of misconceptions about it. And to kind of add to that, the rules change over time as recycling and waste management capabilities and processes evolve.
Hmm.
And so it's just something that's like very difficult for people to keep track of. And so what our technology is able to do is be up to date on whatever the prevailing rules are by time and by location, and reduce contamination on the more sensitive streams. So, that would be recycling. The most sensitive stream is compost, and whatever doesn't meet contamination thresholds, we're able to divert to landfill or incineration. And
Right.
I would say there's there's kind of and so you asked, what have we been able to do with that data? So by reducing contamination, or at least identifying what the likely or most common contaminants are, we're able to identify insights and kind of tactical strategies that we can then communicate to users on our monitor to reduce contamination more. As one example, in one location, our customer was having a lot of plastic bottles come through, like a tremendous amount. But the problem was that 60% of those were contaminated with fluid. That is like people didn't drink all their water or they didn't drink all their soda and they kind of threw it away in TrashBot. And as a result, all of those plastic bottles with too much fluid had to go into a landfill stream because we were trying to keep the recycling stream clean. We were able to deploy content on the monitor that said, empty your plastic bottles before you toss them, otherwise we can't recycle them. And we saw an immediate jump of I want to say it was like 50% increase in
Oh, that's
plastic bottles with
high.
reduced contamination. Yeah, it's quite high. And so what that tells us is that number one, again, recycling is hard, and people want to do the right thing, but they have to know what the right thing is, and it has to be easy. And so that's the kind of insight that custom data analysis by location can kind of garner.
Right. So I mean, there's two major technologies that you've mentioned. Just kind of taking a step back, you're using AI and you're using robotics. I think at the
Hmm.
moment in the industry, these are like key buzzwords right now. I know AI has
Hmm.
been around for a while, but it seems like since ChatGPT has evolved,
Hmm.
everyone's talking about it way more. So
Hmm.
how,
Yeah.
what does that kind of mean to you, those two industries as a whole, but also in relation to what you're trying to achieve in waste management?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I think the word is zeitgeist, right? The kind of spirit of the times is
Yeah.
around AI, and obviously, what's cool about our technology is that it's very tangible, and so
Hmm.
a lot of artificial intelligence technologies and applications are kind of intangible. They're things that maybe a data analyst or a software engineer will be working on in the background, and it's hard for traditional stakeholders to kind of uh, appreciate and see the value of that, and or understand how their organization is doing it, using it. I would say the same is true for sustainability initiatives writ large. A lot of sustainability progress that an organization can make is also intangible and fairly abstract. You can change the light bulbs, but as long as the lighting works, most people in a facility aren't going to notice. You can do water mitigation and other types of environmental and sustainability uh, strategies that people just don't get or don't see. The interesting thing about TrashBot is that it's a tangible manifestation of both applications of technology and efforts. On the sustainability side, you know that TrashBot's going to sort better than people. You can interact with it. You see what it's doing. You can get the communications on the monitor. And likewise, it's a very tangible application of robotics and AI. So from that perspective, organizations that want to position themselves kind of at the forefront of both are able to leverage clean robotics technology in that way. And it's also a really efficient way to get time to result, right? You can educate your stakeholders, whether it's the traveling public or visitors or staff, until you're blue in the face. But ultimately, you're kind of relying on whatever notions they have about recycling and waste management in their minds to kind of do things correctly. Uh, so those are kind of the key value propositions. I would say, um, more broadly speaking, the way that the waste industry is using artificial intelligence is really um, to kind of improve efficiencies and take people out of jobs that are dull, dangerous, and dirty, right? And that's kind of the best
Right.
application of robotics. It's jobs that people shouldn't be doing, and then if you do find people in them, they don't last long in them. So I want to say the at a recycling plant, the average turnover for a person is 60% turnover every 30 days, right? So
Oh,
that's
wow.
tremendous. It's a huge
Yeah, it's
staffing challenge.
massive.
hmm And so this tells you people just don't like doing it. It's, like I said, dull, dirty, and dangerous. And so AI and robotics and computer vision systems in general, and the data that's kind of embedded there is, obviously better for the environment. You're going to get better results. You're going to get data on ways to improve in very practical and tactical ways. And you also, just get people out of jobs that are, people shouldn't be doing if
Mm.
there's a better alternative.
Right. And I mean, the thing is though, so I mean, this is before speaking with you, I really honestly didn't know there was some sort of like AI or robot that can actually really, sort out waste management. And you've mentioned there that there is obviously some huge benefits there, certainly around safety of individuals, staffing, but also
hmm
costs. So I suppose the ultimate
hmm
question is, why isn't governments and communities taking up on this sort of even not even just your product, but even just other similar competitors or
hmm
companies that are doing this? Why aren't they implementing some sort of technology around this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what I'm seeing from a trends perspective is that there is a lot of incentives around the world for uh, organizations to innovate with these types of technologies in the waste space. I think a lot of what's happening is kind of unseen because most people don't want to go to a recycling plant. Most people don't want to go to a landfill. Most people, when they throw things away, that's it. They forget about it, right? And so
Yeah.
the innovations are kind of unseen and they're not quite publicized. All of that being said, governments around the world are creating tailwinds for innovations like ours by either being more aggressive with fines for folks that don't handle their waste appropriately. That is, like clean recyclables where the clean recyclables need to be, clean compost where the clean organics need to be, and landfill reduction in general. So they can fine people for improperly sorting their waste. They can also mandate price differentials where landfill, for example, in Los Angeles, landfill is about 5 times more expensive than recycling and compost, right? And so that price difference naturally creates a market incentive to reduce your landfill expenses because it's just so much more expensive.
Yeah.
Um, and that type of tailwind naturally leads to facilities and the industry to think about how to implement cost saving measures and improve efficiencies. And so I think there's a lot happening there that is kind of unseen.
Okay, so there is some in places, just we just don't hear about it.
hmm hmm Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Definitely.
And then what about, so I've done quite a few of these podcasts now around artificial intelligence, and there's
Hmm.
there is a theme around this, around data privacy and making sure that
Mm,
companies are controlling and using their
mm.
data compliantly, and yeah, respecting that. So how is that something that you guys are addressing around data privacy? Is that something that you're stumbling across all the time? And if so, how are you sort of handling and managing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, um, first of all the data that we collect is naturally anonymized, so
Hmm.
we're not able to identify who threw what away into our system.
Yeah,
So
of
from
course
just
not.
a kind of a public interaction perspective, it's naturally anonymized. And kind of on the individual client perspective, we're very cautious to not share client data with anyone that's not related to that organization. And we kind of adhere to best practices to the extent where we're able to pass the information security assessments from uh, let's call them sensitive government organizations with flying colors.
Right. Because I think what people, so like, for example, I think what they fear. So let's say, for example, one government institution or one state, for example, has way more landfill and less recycling more than the other. Are you just collecting
Hmm.
the data just to figure out, okay, how can we make this more efficient? Or actually, are you passing this information so then those guys can take more action?
Both.
Yeah.
So we take the data and use it to improve our algorithms, to improve the accuracy, the sorting capabilities, and then we also use it for kind of our own data mining purposes, usually for
Hmm.
business improvement, that sort of thing. But there's also tremendous value there for the customer. And what I usually say is that people come to us for the enhanced sorting, but they stay for the data and the analytics because that's what's uh, tangibly practical. Um, and so the data that we're able to provide to customers allows them to take initiatives that they can use to further improve their own operations, glean insights, and it's also something that frankly, they want to brag about to their stakeholders, whether it's leadership, potentially investors, the public and staff that they interact with. These are all kind of useful uses from a communication strategy for the data that we gather.
Hmm. Okay. And then what about sort of collaboration? So you mentioned Denver Airport, for example. Is
Hmm.
there any sort of collaborations and partnerships that you guys are involved in to sort of advance waste management technology that you happily like sort of discuss and sort of the work you're doing already?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a company in the UK that we collaborate with on our data taxonomy.
Okay.
Um, and our kind of rationale there is that a rising sea kind of raises all boats. So we think it makes sense to selectively collaborate with other innovators in the space that are kind of paving a path in their own kind of in their own dimension. We think it makes sense to have a common language around
Hmm.
data and waste, and so these are the kind of the opportunities that we see. Yeah.
Okay, so you're not even just doing this in the US, you're also doing it like across my side of the pond, UK and Europe as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's a global problem, so we think it's going to take a global approach to crack the nut.
I agree. Yeah, it's definitely a global issue. And I mean, there are some countries. I mean, you've got Japan, for example. I feel like
Hmm.
those guys really manage their waste management properly. You go to
Hmm.
somewhere like Los Angeles. I mean, I remember when I was living there. I mean, it wasn't easy to recycle anything at all, if I'm very honest.
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny. What I find is in conversation, well, you mentioned Japan, for example, and Japan's interesting because they have this global reputation for being quite effective and efficient in managing their waste.
Mm,
But in the conversations I've had with Japanese folks, even though it's culturally embedded in them to really manage their waste responsibly, they find it tedious, and few people really enjoy doing it. So even in places where they have their act together, I think technologies um, like TrashBot that use AI, robotics, or computer vision or data analytics are still useful. And what we also find is that as we kind of have an inversion of the population pyramid, and Japan's kind of a classic example of this, the elderly really struggle to kind of keep up with waste management rules
Yes.
and recycling rules, especially as technologies evolve in sorting facilities. And those rules change. People get in the habits of doing things the same way, and when those rules change, they have a difficult time kind of adapting. Um, and so, yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity. And it's funny that you mentioned Los Angeles because Los Angeles is one of the places where they've kind of mandated a price differential between landfill and everything
Oh,
else. And so
okay.
there's a tremendous amount of market pull uh, uh, for us and related technologies there too.
I just remember one of the apartments I was living in. I even if I was to throw like trash in the recycling bin, like there was loads of
Mhm.
other landfill stuff in there. Like it just looked so messy and so untidy.
Yeah, yeah. It's and high density housing is really difficult, like like in an apartment setting, right? Because
Yeah.
um, the building will get fined for improperly handled waste, but they're really relying on
Okay.
all the residents to do it correctly, right? So you could have, I don't know, let's say in a 10-story building, 9 floors that do it right, and then the one floor that doesn't for whatever reason, like messes up the whole load.
That's really interesting. Yeah. What do you think's next in terms of the industry with waste management? So obviously you mentioned traditionally people are very used to just throwing their trash in, landfill sites. I mean, where do you kind of see how we're managing it on a global scale and also on a domestic scale in perhaps the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, that's a really, really fantastic question. So Um, I think we're seeing a general trend. So the waste industry, I should preface, is a historically kind of opaque industry
Mm.
where there are many incentives to kind of keep data and information obfuscated and obscure. And this is kind of the way that haulers have just kind of operated, and it works out well for them. But what I'm seeing is kind of a general trend towards increased transparency. Part of that is driven by data, but it's also driven by customer requirements. We want to know how much you're hauling, justify your charges here, and if you don't do it, then your competitor will. And so we're seeing an integration of more sophisticated data capture enabled by computer vision systems at all levels of the waste stack. So whether that's at the dumpster level, at the truck level, at the bin level, kind of a replay, going as far as the transfer station, recycling plants, and landfill. So there's data capture that will be increasing over the next, like, let's say 10 years at every
Hmm.
stage of the value stack for waste management. And I think that's generally positive. It'll allow us to kind of to know where waste is being generated, what type of waste is generated, where, the level of contamination, and opportunities for improvement. And from an extended producer responsibility perspective, it if we're capturing logo information, for example, at scale, now we can uh, point a finger at a producer, let's say, and kind of drive improvements in their practices, whether that's in material selection, packaging selection, all towards um, reducing waste that is either not compostable or not recyclable. Just reducing the amount of stuff that has to go to landfill.
Right. And then what is the trend you're seeing now? So obviously our population is just getting bigger and bigger every day. But do you find, despite that, do you find that we are recycling more and we are managing our waste better, or do you think it's
Hmm,
worse?
that's an interesting question. Um, I don't think it's getting better, and there's in the short term. I think in the long term it will. In the short term, there's a lot of kind of macro forces that are in play that are kind of stymieing our best efforts. Um,
Mm.
I think there's a lot of so for example, China used to be the largest importer of recyclable materials in the world, right? And fundamentally, they got tired of taking the world's garbage. They implemented first a green fence one, then a green fence two, and then a national sort policy. And these were national level policies to reduce the amount of recyclable materials that they were importing. And since then, the global industry has shifted and tried to accommodate um, endogenous material recovery. That is, for example, the United States started building more recycling plants kind of when they weren't able to export it to China anymore. Um,
Mhm.
but what has happened since then with oil prices and other things is that it has become more difficult from a
Yeah.
profit perspective to recover plastics. And this is why part of the reason we have so much plastic waste ending up in the ocean. Um, and I think the innovations that need to happen there are happening right now around material science. So finding new polymers that are better, that are more biodegradable, coming from more renewable sources like algae and other kind of organic ways, organic um, origins. And so I think we need, I think what it's gonna take for the overall waste landscape to improve is innovations across an ecosystem, from materials, material science, more biodegradable, economics, where these new materials are more cost effective than traditional. It's going to take consumer preference shifts, which are
Mhm.
already taking place. I'm not going to buy this because it's not recyclable or compostable. And instead, I'm going to buy this, biodegradable alternative. And it's going to take changes in the scale of production for all of these things, which all kind of like happens sequentially, but hopefully simultaneously as well. So it's a very complex question that you pose there.
Fair enough. And yeah, and just to kind of like, try to wrap things up. So, first of all, talking about you specifically and also the company, I mean, what's your sort of like future vision in terms of, clean robotics and what you're trying to achieve? I know you guys got some funding, you had some fundraising around that. So, what are you sort of, what's your kind of goals for like the next, foreseeable couple of years or so?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So I think in the near term, we're focused on domestic expansion within the United States. Starting next year, we have uh, our sights set on a number of international markets where we believe that the regulatory environment is in our favor. Um, Europe and the UK being kind of one of those. So hopefully, you'll be seeing a TrashBot soon in person.
Probably outside my house or something. See a
Hopefully,
little robot out
yeah.
there.
Yeah, we have a number of kind of new products that we also have in development that we would kind of like to see come out as proof of concepts and fruition from a technical perspective. So those are kind of like the overarching goals that we see there.
Great. And then, I mean, what would your advice be to individuals and businesses that want to or are considering um, embracing, more sustainable waste management practices? What would your advice be to
Mm,
those?
yeah, that is a great question. Um, I think the advice for organizations is perhaps more salient because you can have an impact as an organization on everyone that's in your building, whereas individuals just have to, do their best to get educated on things. It's harder for individuals. For organizations, I would say if you're trying to improve the waste management practices in your building, it comes down to really careful purchasing. So if you want to divert as much as possible from landfill, well, let's say you want to get to zero waste and divert everything from landfill, it's going to come down to not having things in your building that are landfillable. Um, so that, from the cutlery and the plasticware that's in your cafeteria to the things in your vending machine, you can make very deliberate choices there that will just make it way easier for your staff, the visiting public, and so on, to make good decisions. Implementing technology like ours, will help you kind of measure the impact that your initiatives are having. But ultimately, technologies like ours will only be able to sort uh, the recyclables that are recyclable and the compostables that are compostable, and everything else has to go to landfill. So if you just reduce the amount of landfillable items that your organization is purchasing, that's going to drive the biggest change for you.
Is there anything else that you wanted to sort of add before we wrap up the podcast?
Thanks for having me. This has been a pleasure. Uh,
Thank you so much. I learned
yeah,
so much from this podcast, and I honestly, I just think it's a great initiative. So, I mean, I'm very always keen to, explore like how we can kind of, better serve our communities, also, help our nature and things like that. And I think what you guys are proposing and what your product offering is such a great, I think, more people should be adopting this, and hopefully, the next 5 years we'll be seeing more robots and more AI being used in our waste management system. So thank you so much for joining.
yeah. Thanks, Malika. This was great.
Thank you.